Welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax.
Hello, and welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax. I'm Nora Devine, a property tax attorney who has spent the last 2 decades or more representing owners across Illinois. I'm interested in representing single parcel investors, homeowners, and statewide portfolios. Today's guest is Ed Quick. He is a volunteer veteran services officer at daydalliance.org, and he has been working in collaboration with Veterans Advocacy Law Group to help veterans achieve their disability ratings and maximize their benefits. He is a longtime advocate for veterans and an expert on VA disability. Ed, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nora. Thank you.
So I hear you're in Colorado. How's the weather there?
Yeah, we've got a great day today. It's going to be up to 50 degrees here in January, and blue skies. And
for the listeners, we're recording this in January of 2026, and there's a deep freeze that's taken over in Chicago. But Ed, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and introduce yourself?
So I'm a retired officer from the military as a chief warrant officer 4. I served active duty, guard, and reserve, and retired in 2014 with 40 years of total service. And I've been working as a volunteer VSO, Veteran Service Officer, for the last 20 years, even while I was still in the service, in the Warrior Transition Unit down at Fort Carson and also at Fort Bliss. So I helped veterans while I was still on active duty during that period, and then obviously I still do it today through my organization, daydalliance.org. I've helped everybody in our local flight. We have over 100 members, all veterans, all military pilots, and navigators and medical officers that belong to Daydalliance, and I do referrals, but I've helped hundreds over the years, been quite successful.
Great. Was there well, first of all, thank you for your service, of course, but was there a specific moment that you knew that you wanted to get involved and volunteer in this way?
So a couple reasons. One, my brother, who was a captain, a military intelligence officer in Vietnam, served 2 tours. He didn't get his veterans benefits when he was in really need of them years ago before he passed away. And so I kind of blamed the VA for that. So that was energized me to start helping veterans, and also help my own father, who was a World War II veteran, and I was able to get him 100% before he passed away. And just friends and family members and people I've worked with over the years, that's where I come up with helping over hundreds of veterans over the years.
That sounds great. Here in Illinois, we have some pretty good real estate tax breaks for veterans. And a number of years ago, maybe 10 or more years ago, they passed a complete exemption from property tax for veterans that had paperwork showing they had a 70% or greater service-related disability. And this was a piece of legislation that was passed without a whole lot of review from the various stakeholders. The assessors didn't really get to look at it. The lawyers didn't really get to look at it. They kind of passed it at midnight on the last day of the legislative session, that kind of thing. And what the legislators did was they tied the market value to the wrong thing. So they said, okay, we're going to cap this exemption for houses that are valued no greater than, $250,000 assessed value. And from what I heard from lobbyists and people in the know, they meant to tie it to $250,000 in market value. But instead, the law passed as saying it was tied to assessed value. So we ended up with a situation where you could buy a house for $750,000 outside of Cook County, or a house for about $950,000 inside of Cook County, and be completely exempt from tax. And there was also no means test. So it didn't matter if you were, sitting on a pile of wealth, or if you earned quite a lot of money, maybe $1 million a year or more. So for a while, attorneys like me were getting calls at least a few times a year from someone out of state wanting to relocate to Illinois because of this attractive benefit that they could have on even a very kind of high value house at the time. So we started seeing a lot of this, and there's been various studies that have tried to gauge the impact of how much of the equalized assessed value has been displaced by this exemption. But it did have an impact, quite a bit of impact on the assessed value in certain areas, particularly where we do have more veterans, like around some of our bases in the south part of the state and things like that. But the idea is if you have a 70% or greater service related disability, then you can have a house valued up to either $750,000 outside of Cook County or about $950,000 inside of Cook County and not have any tax bill whatsoever. And then it was kind of absurd the way that the law was written and the way it was being implemented, because if your assessment went like $1 over the cap, you would lose the entire benefit. So you'd have people calling saying like, how much house can I buy? And so, I'd advise them, I'd say, well, you could buy this much house, but if the assessment creeps $1 over this cap, you could lose the whole thing. And so I got someone I'll never forget. And I said, you could buy a house for $750. And he goes, well, I found a house that was assessed for $735, but I paid $760 for it. And I said, well, okay, I don't think you understood the assignment, And so I was begging the assessor year after year to work with me on this equalizer. And he did. It was really a veteran friendly assessor, luckily for him. And then a few years into it, he sends me plans for refinishing the basement or finishing the basement. He had an unfinished full basement and he wanted to spend like tens of thousands of dollars finishing the basement. And I said, look, I can't advise you to do something without a permit, but I can tell you if you pull that permit, like you're going to kiss this exemption goodbye. So we had this cliff for a while, and then the legislature changed that recently, and they made it so that now the treasurer is supposed to figure out how to issue a tax bill for the value over and above the statutory limits. So you have an exemption on that first, component, and then over and above that, they would issue a bill. So that's kind of how it works here. And I know I didn't tell you to prepare to answer this question, but are you familiar with any other states that have these types of, exemptions that are this meaningful?
Yes, I am familiar. So give you an example. If you're at 100% disabled and you live in Texas, then you're 100% exempt from your property tax, regardless of the value of the home. Here in Colorado, wow, as an example, if you have $1 million home, they give you a $200,000 exemption. And that's only if you are 100%, not 70, 100%. And then you only technically get 100,000 of the 200, they give you 50% of that. So $1 million home, you get $100,000 off of that. So it'd be assessed at 900,000.
So that's pretty meaningful.
Yeah. So actually the benefit that Illinois is giving is, on the high side. Most states, there's a lot of states that give nothing for veterans. And then wow, there are other states that give 100% property tax exemptions, and it just varies throughout the country.
So when you hear they use 70% as the big property tax relief threshold, you said that seems lower than what you've heard in other states. Some states make you clear 100% before they really give you meaningful relief.
That is correct. And again, it depends on each state and how the legislature decides as to what to give to the veterans within their state. Obviously, Illinois has decided that they're going to give at 70% and higher an exemption, property tax exemption for the full amount, in this case up to $750,000 as you discussed, and then hopefully prorated after that with the correction that the legislature has done to correct that. So you wouldn't, once you go over that, you wouldn't get zero. That doesn't make any sense either.
Right. Yeah. It didn't make a lot of sense, and it created some kind of silly conversations and situations, as you can imagine. Yeah. So, we have a lot of assessing officials that may listen to the podcast. And I think a lot of them wonder, how is this sausage made when it comes to figuring out what disability percentage someone should get? Like, how, in plain English, how do you explain it to people?
So what I do as a volunteer is I help veterans fill out the form. I don't fill it out for them. I just help them help themselves by explaining how to fill out the form. And the form is the VA form 21-526EZ. Nothing easy about it. It's multiple pages. And once you get past the first 8 pages of instructions, and you start filling it in. So a lot of veterans will read it. If they're doing it on their own, their eyes gloss over and they stop there. But with help, in this case, my help, that's where I help them explain each page as we fill it out together. And I do it over the phone with them, and I explain each page. And then once we get to page 10 or 11, which is what I call the money page, that's where you list your disabilities. And that's where a lot of veterans, don't know what to put down as their disabilities and how to explain it. That's where I help them. And so the main thing is the veteran needs to claim all of the benefits that they're entitled to on that page. And if you just put down 1 or 2 items, you're never going to get to that 70% we're talking about, unless you, have been diagnosed, you're a combat veteran, and you're diagnosed with TBI, you could get a 70% rating for that. You could get a 70% rating for hearing, as an example. So
Right.
it varies
Tinnitus,
between
right?
each
Is that
veteran.
it? The hearing issues like tinnitus?
Well, tinnitus, that's an interesting point that you bring up. So I start with all veterans. I say, let's list your hearing loss and tinnitus, because most veterans, especially combat veterans, are around explosions and loud noises. Hearing loss is what it is. You go into the box and you come out, and you either meet the threshold for a rating from the VA or you don't. 0% rating is still a rating. It can only go up from there. In other words, they're taking responsibility for it, and they say it's service connected. 10% for tinnitus, that's the max that you can get. But talking about that as we start here, you can get a higher rating secondary to tinnitus. One of the examples are tinnitus can cause sleeping issues. And so you can get sleep apnea, which at a minimum currently is at 50%. And so
Wow,
you add the 10% and the 50, and that's how you go up in your rating.
that's interesting. Yeah, because I mean, if you just flew planes, I mean, it's a loud thing to do, to even just probably do some of the aviating you've done.
So most veterans that apply do get tinnitus. It's they hand out the tinnitus rating more than any other rating is from the VA. Probably looking at 90% plus of veterans who apply for it get it. And that's because most veterans, as an example, Army veterans, which I am, we go through basic and AIT, and, you go through simulated combat when you go through your training, where they throw artillery and grenade simulators at you through what we call a live fire exercise. And almost all veterans go through that in their basic training, whether they're Navy, Marines, Army, Air Force, all of us. And so that's when your hearing problem can start. That's where tinnitus can start. Or, if you serve in a combat location, you're getting artillery rounds coming in or mortars, and they land next to you, that can cause it, or any other loud noise.
And then what's the distinction between injured while serving and also service connected? Because when people hear service connected, maybe their imagination goes to, combat or something like that. But I think it's broader than that, right?
So service connected is any veteran, as we just talked about. So you can go in and apply. A lot of veterans think when they go to the VA hospital that they're applying for their benefits. There's 2 sides, 3 sides of the stool there. One is the hospital. You can get benefits through the hospital, medical benefits. Comp and pen, that's what I help with. And that's the money that you get based upon your disabilities. And then there's your education benefits. But if you go to the hospital and you apply, lots of times they'll ask, they want you to divulge all your income and that kind of stuff, and you won't qualify, or you'll be at the highest level for care through the VA versus being at the lowest level, which is level 1. That's where you get 100% of your prescriptions are paid for by the VA. Once you get past 50%, as an example, there's no co-pays, both medically and prescription-wise, for any veteran. So there's different levels. 10% tinnitus, as an example, will get you in the medical system without having to qualify financially, because most veterans make too much money. But if you're, say, an indigent veteran, you would qualify as long as you served honorably, obviously. But for those veterans who made a lot of money, at 10%, they give it to you for tinnitus, then you're automatically enrolled in the medical system. Or if you're a combat veteran, you're automatically enrolled. So that's the first hurdle to get in, 10%. And at that, you get roughly around $180 currently. The next level you jump to is 30%. I'll say, what do we get for that? Well, you're going to get an increase in your pay, but you also get, if you're married and have children, you get extra money for your spouse or dependents, and that starts at 30%. The next jump is 50%. At 50%, as I said earlier, that's where you get zero copays for prescription and medical. You're at the highest level medically at 50%. And then that also starts different benefits normally throughout the country. Different states offer different benefits. As an example, here in Colorado, at that we get our what we call DV plates, disabled veteran plates, and they're free, and we don't have to pay for those, and we don't pay any taxes on our vehicle that we have. So you want to put it on your, if you have more than one vehicle, the one that's worth the most, obviously, because it's tax exempt at 50%. The next level we go to is the key that you're talking about today is 70%. That's a big deal to get to that 70% rating. In Illinois, obviously, you're going to get a property tax exemption there, which is huge. But in addition to it, at 70%, veterans at that point are given in-home care and nursing home care if they ever need it down the road. You have to get to that 70% level. And you still get your full comp and pen pay, which is all tax-free. And then you can go to a nursing home if you need that, and it's paid for 100% by the VA. But you must be at 70% or higher, or in some cases at a lower percentage if you have a service-connected disability that requires care that would put you in a nursing home, as an example.
Are there times that it's harder to pin the disability to the service itself?
You know, each veteran is a challenge, and it's different for each veteran. So, yes, you know, some veterans will qualify for disabilities where other veterans might not qualify for the same disability. And, you know, that's just the way the VA works. You know, I've helped veterans who have gotten 90% rating just for hearing loss, as an example. I just had that recently, which was the highest of anybody that's gotten it, and he has bad hearing. And then I helped another veteran around the same time, and he got 0% rating for his hearing. But as far as I could tell, they both had, both wore hearing aids and both had really bad hearing. So that goes back to how do you get that rating? Well, I help you fill out that form, the VA form 21526EZ. We put in all your disabilities, and then you're seen normally now within 30 to 60 days. The VA will set you up with an outside provider, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, somebody like that, or in this case, an audiologist also. And you'll have your appointments. Depending on what you put down for your disabilities, you can have up to 3, some maybe up to 4 appointments. And then after that, while you're at the appointment, the doctor writes up what the VA has asked them to look at. They send it back to the VA, and then it goes to the regional office all across the country. And you have what I call Joe Snuffy, E5. Military people would understand that, E5, E6 type. They open their VA book, they read what the doctor sent them, and they decide, not the doctor, they decide what rating you're going to get. If they're having a bad day, you could get a 0 rating just because they're having a bad day. Or if they're upset, you could get a high rating.
Something you said made me think of like how things go in my practice area, where similar facts can produce different results depending on which county you're in or which assessing official you're dealing with. Do you find that different regions are easier than others, or can you say?
Yes, one that stands out to me, I've had some recent ones come out of Arizona, and they just denied, everything we listed for multiple veterans that I've helped. So I don't know what's wrong with them. And again, that's where when I get done with the veteran, I've helped them all the way through their paperwork process. I also help them when they go visit the doctors. I say, call me before you go in. That's what I do as a volunteer. Call me. They go in, and I say, first of all, you need to know who you're going to see, why you're seeing them. Oh, by the way, we're going to discuss the disabilities that relate to that visit. Because sometimes a veteran will shoot themselves in the foot because they say, oh, I'm just feeling great today. My back doesn't hurt me. Well, then you just shot yourself in the foot and you're going to get a 0 rating for it. So having them know what they need to say, we don't want anybody to lie, but we want them to be truthful. But you tell them what your worst day is, not your best day. So a week later, the guy can't even get out of the bed. That's what you need to tell the doctor and show the doctor.
Do VA percentages add up normally, or is there a different formula that kind of surprises people?
Yeah, it's definitely a different formula. It's called VA fuzzy math, as we call it out here in our world. So just because you have a rating, say 10% for that tinnitus I talked about, and we give you 50% for sleep apnea, that doesn't necessarily add to 60. Most people would think, well, I got 60%. That's not true. So what they do is take a percentage. So if they give you 50% for sleep apnea, well, then the next 50% of your body, they prorate that based upon you have 50% left. If you get another 50%, so that's two 50s, that adds up to what, 100? Well, in VA fuzzy math,
I would say so.
It adds up to 75.
Gotcha. Well, it's over 70, so I would take it if I were them.
Yeah, that's what you're looking for. And of course, here's another picture on that. So, and we're talking 70 is the key number there in Illinois. So if you're at 65, we'll get you 70, and 74 will get you 70, the actual payment. So that's, again, the fuzzy math. So that's how it falls as they're trying to figure out. A lot of veterans are frustrated by that. They say, well, mine adds up to 100, but the VA's giving me 75, and yet they're paying me at 70 because you get paid at 10% increments.
And is 70 more reachable than some people might think?
It can be. It depends, again, on the veteran and their service, is what we're talking about. Service connected is any veteran who gets a rating 10% or higher is listed as service connected. And that goes back to your question there, is service connected. The other side of that is if you are get a service connection, say for PTSD, well, normally that would be due to combat. And then if you are a retiree, as an example, you can be exempt on your retirement pay based upon combat injuries, which is separate and different, as an example. But for VA purposes, anybody, if you hurt your ankle and you're service connected, that's what they'll put on your ID card.
Interesting. So where can they start if they want help understanding their rating or if they're filing correctly?
So every county has what we call VSOs, Veteran Service Officers. The American Legion, the USO, Disabled Veterans, they also have VSO. Most of them are paid positions. I do it strictly as a volunteer. I accept no money for my services. And so that's a starting point for them. So if they've never applied, the most important thing a veteran needs to do is to apply for their benefits. And when they do apply, please list everything that you can think of on that form. And that's where I help veterans. They're quite surprised when I get done with them. They didn't think about items, and sometimes when I'm helping them, their wives are in the background, and then they speak up and tell their husband, "Wait, you didn't tell them about this is what happened while you were in the service," and then they remember. So I've helped veterans all the way from current people is still in the service right now, to include my own son-in-law, helping him with he to obtain his veterans benefits as he retires. And I've helped all the way up to World War II veterans and Korea veterans, Vietnam veterans, and just people who have served.
Well, this is great information. I think it'll give somebody something to think about in terms of, taking a look and seeing what benefits they might qualify for. It's certainly a worthwhile thing to look at here in Illinois. So that's it for today's show. Thank you so much, Ed, for being here.
Thank you, Nora.
All right, that's it for today's episode of Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax. A huge thank you to Ed Quick for joining me and sharing his volunteer work with veterans. If you need help understanding your VA disability rating, Ed recommends that you reach out to Veteran Advocacy Law Group at 866-433-4116. And if you'd like to reach me and my team about any kind of property assessment issue, please visit thedivinelawgroup.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review whenever you listen.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.